Welcome back, database enthusiasts, to another exciting episode of Database Internal's Crashcasts. I'm Sheila, and as always, I'm joined by the incredible Victor. Before we dive in, if you're enjoying our podcast, please take a moment to rate us on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us. Today, we're continuing our journey through the Relational Database Systems season, focusing on the chapter about relational model concepts. Specifically, we'll be exploring relations, tuples, and attributes. Victor, are you ready to unravel these fundamental concepts?
Absolutely, Sheila. I'm excited to dive into these core building blocks of relational databases. They're essential for understanding how data is organized and manipulated in systems we use every day.
Great. Let's kick things off with a quiz question for our listeners. Picture a library catalog system. Can you identify which parts of this system would represent a relation, a tuple, and an attribute? Think about it, and we'll reveal the answer at the end of the episode.
Oh, that's a great question, Sheila. It really makes you think about how these abstract database concepts map to real-world scenarios. I'm sure our listeners will have fun pondering this as we go through the episode. Shall we start by breaking down these terms?
Absolutely. Let's begin with the term relation. Victor, could you give us a clear definition of what a relation is in the context of relational databases?
Certainly. In relational database theory, a relation is essentially a table. It's a collection of related data entries organized in columns and rows. Think of it as a spreadsheet, where each sheet represents a different relation. For example, in our library system, we might have a relation called books that contains information about all the books in the library.
That's a helpful explanation, Victor. So, if I understand correctly, in our library example, books would be one relation, and we might have other relations like members or loans. Is that right?
Exactly right, Sheila. You've got the hang of it. Now let's move on to the concept of tuples. In the context of our relation or table, what do you think a tuple represents?
Well, based on what we've discussed, I believe a tuple would be a single row in our table or relation. So in our books relation, each tuple would represent a specific book. Am I on the right track?
You're absolutely correct, Sheila. A tuple is indeed a single row in a relation representing a unique entry or record. In our books relation, each tuple would contain all the information about a specific book. It's worth noting that in database terminology, we often use the term record interchangeably with tuple.
That makes sense. So, if relations are tables and tuples are rows, I'm guessing attributes must be the columns, right? Could you elaborate on attributes for our listeners, Victor?
You're on a roll, Sheila. Yes, attributes are indeed the columns in our relation. Each attribute represents a specific piece of information about the entity we're describing. In our books relation, attributes might include things like title, author, ISBN, publication date, and so on. Each attribute has a name and a data type, which defines what kind of information it can hold.
I see. So, to summarize, a relation is like a spreadsheet or table. Tuples are the rows containing individual entries, and attributes are the columns defining the types of information we're storing. Is there anything else our listeners should know about these concepts?
Great summary, Sheila. There are a few more important points to consider. First, it's crucial to understand that in a properly designed relational database, each tuple in a relation should be unique. This uniqueness is often ensured by having a primary key, which is an attribute or combination of attributes that uniquely identifies each tuple.
That's interesting, Victor. So in our books relation, the ISBN might serve as a primary key since it's unique to each book. Are there any common misconceptions about relations, tuples, and attributes that our listeners should be aware of?
Absolutely, Sheila. One common misconception is that relations always represent entities in the real world. While this is often the case, relations can also represent relationships between entities. For example, we might have a loans relation that connects books with library members.
That's a great point, Victor. It reminds me of how flexible the relational model can be. Speaking of flexibility, how do these concepts compare to non-relational or NoSQL databases?
Excellent question, Sheila. In non-relational databases, the concepts of relations, tuples, and attributes might not apply in the same way. For instance, in a document-based NoSQL database like MongoDB, you might have collections instead of relations, documents instead of tuples, and fields instead of attributes. The main difference is that NoSQL databases often allow for more flexible, schemaless data structures, whereas relational databases enforce a strict schema based on the defined relations and attributes.
That's fascinating, Victor. It really highlights the importance of choosing the right database model for your specific needs. Now, as we're nearing the end of our episode, could you share some best practices for designing relations in a database?
Certainly, Sheila. When designing relations, it's important to 1. Normalize your data to reduce redundancy and improve data integrity. This means organizing your data efficiently. 2. Choose appropriate primary keys for each relation. 3. Use meaningful and consistent naming conventions for relations and attributes. 4. Consider the relationships between different relations and use foreign keys to establish these connections. 5. Think about the queries that will be run on your database and design your relations to support these efficiently.
Those are great tips, Victor. I'm sure our listeners will find them helpful. Now it's time to reveal the answer to our quiz question. In a library catalogue system, the relation would be the entire catalogue or a table of books. A tuple would be the entry for a single book, and an attribute would be a specific piece of information about the book, like its title or author. How did our listeners do?
I hope our listeners were able to figure it out. It's a great way to solidify these concepts by applying them to real-world scenarios. Remember, practice makes perfect when it comes to database design.
Absolutely, Victor. And that brings us to the end of today's episode on relations, tuples, and attributes. We've covered a lot of ground, from basic definitions to best practices and comparisons with NoSQL databases. Remember, listeners, these concepts form the foundation of relational databases, so understanding them is crucial for anyone working with data. Before we sign off, we'd love to hear from you. Visit crashcasts.com to join our Discord community, where you can discuss today's topic and connect with other database enthusiasts. If you're enjoying our content, please consider supporting us on Patreon. And don't forget to subscribe and rate our podcast. It really helps us reach more people. Until next time, keep questioning your assumptions and happy data modeling.